Good morning. I'm Tom Grimes with Ivalua Public Sector, a NASCA partner focused on delivering best-in-class source-to-pay procurement solutions for organizations at all levels of government. I'm joined today by my colleague, Sean Correll, Head of Public Sector Solutions for North America. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. We're thrilled to be joined by one of our clients, the state of Maryland. In today's presentation, we have joining us Secretary Ellington Churchill of Department of General Services, Chief Procurement Officer Bob Gleason, Assistant Secretary Louis Luna of Facilities Management, and Assistant Secretary Lauren Buckler of Design, Construction, and Energy. Thank you all for being here. In today's session, we'll be discussing the impact of this year's unique challenges, how State of Maryland responded to those challenges, and the path forward. Let's begin with some general questions. Undoubtedly, the pandemic has fundamentally changed how governments provide services to citizens. How has DGS adjusted to addressing this mission?
Well, thank you for having us here, Tom. It's a great question. General Services is a department within the executive branch that handles capital construction, procurement, real estate, the security force for our state complex, and business development. From all divisions from the department, we're engaged in the pandemic response, fully stretched and fully looking at the way that we deploy our resources and missions to be able to positively affect the citizens of Maryland. Like any department, we're integrated with the Maryland Department of Health, which was lead, and we listened. We listened to the Department of Health and said, whatever is required of us, we'll try to figure it out, because that's what we do normally within our business for the state. And we're charged with a number of different things that we had not ever historically been tasked with. And it's thanks to the members that are here with me on the call that we were able to succeed and at the end of the day, really have a benefit for Marylanders.
Secretary Churchill, what changes to DGS do you think will outlive the pandemic response, as opposed to turning back to the old model eventually?
Well, the pandemic has provided a number of opportunities for the state and for general services in terms of addressing how we deploy our business. We're always have been over the last number of years looking to be more customer focused for customer support. But the pandemic has had the opportunity for us to reorganize how our physical infrastructure operates. We have found that the lessons of being able to have a smaller footprint and still engage in our mission successfully has worked. We are actively looking at how telework can be utilized successfully and efficiently. There are, of course, pros and cons that we are looking at so that we can continue to deploy that model after the end of the pandemic. And then there's been an opportunity to really turn toward technology, because our business is about people, people deploying service. But how do we leverage that for the biggest benefit for all? And this department has really looked at what technology overlays, what can be added, to increase our efficiency at deploying service, and two, should there be another health emergency in the future. And again, this has been the first time that there's been a health emergency. It's usually a regional weather emergency. What technologies we can deploy that will help mitigate the spread of a contagious disease. So my team members will be able to tell you more because they were in the trenches. They're leading the troops. And I'm so proud of the efforts that everyone did over the last 8 months.
You know, Secretary Churchill, you mentioned embracing technology and telework, as many other states have done over the past several months. And I would open this up to the group this morning. What lessons, maybe to address any challenges with things like employee productivity or connectedness, engagement, have you encountered, and what solutions perhaps have worked for you? Yeah, and I would open that up to the group.
So I'll take a first shot at that. And good morning. Thank you for doing this. This is a great session, and I appreciate having an opportunity to participate. So I think the technology, you know, okay, so I'm in procurement. This is about supply and demand. We have to have our clients, as Ellington mentioned, the Department of Health and all of the elements that were part of this effort. They need to be able to access goods and services through a network. That network has to be reliable, sustainable, day in, day out. And so providing the technology for them to be able to communicate and then reach through us to the supply side of the equation, to our suppliers. So making sure that communications and infrastructure are in place for our suppliers to work with us, to get paid, to submit invoices, to receive orders and orders. I think that's all part of what I encountered in that perspective.
I think that's a great jumping off point too to one of the topics that we had discussed earlier, which is, you know, the state. What you have led the state's recent initiative, this large scale project to create a new office of state procurement. What's new about that mission? And specifically, has the pandemic response impacted your schedule to stand up and deliver on priority goals, right? Affected the timing there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Certainly. So, yeah, looking back at what's the old saying? It always seems impossible until you're finished, right? So it seemed impossible going in, of course, but this was a wholesale transformation. I can't think of any other state or jurisdiction that's gone through such a wholesale transformation the way Maryland did. And so the pandemic hit us at just the most vulnerable point. And I think we had just gotten through a few months, maybe 5 or 6 months worth of transformation, which was a good thing. So it prepared us for the pandemic. But I think what we realized with regards to mission, our mission is to provide all of the goods and services that the state executive branch agencies need, as well as many of our clients who are local governments. So this, to Ellington's point, was very unusual. This was not just a 3-day, hurricane event. This is a long-term 12-month effort. So we weren't built for that. So we had to take the infrastructure that we have, the methodologies that we have, the technology that we have, and from a people, process, and technology, we had to use the resources at hand to retool, refashion that. And I think the difficulty was we typically procure. We don't typically look at tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers in sort of a global supply chain. That's just not what we do. And so that was our challenge, was reconstituting what we had just built and then turning towards understanding the international global marketplace for certain commodities and the delivery of certain supplies, which is very difficult because, as you know, and everybody on this line knows, everybody in the world was doing it at the same time. Every city, every fire department, every school, every hospital, every state, county, everybody was fighting for the same stuff. So that was our mission, and that was the challenge, and I think the technology helped us to do that.
Tom, if you would, I'd like to add to that because Bob's being a little modest. The Office of State Procurement, through Bob's leadership, is responsible for moving the entire procurement platform from where the state was a couple of years ago into a future model that will allow for a greater ease of use for our vendor community and other state agencies and local jurisdictions. That schedule cannot change. And Bob has got, and the group, Office of State Procurement, have milestones that we have expressed, an overall timetable, and the pandemic has affected that. But in the end, and so like so many other of our divisions, and I think folks are stretched, our standard business still has to be transacted. The pandemic response is an additive measure that we need to stretch to be able to respond to, and they have done that. So in the case of the Office of State Procurement, what we were faced with is pulling resources off of this project, which meant that we were reliant more on our vendor community, even more so. And we really recognize the value of having good partners in the trenches with the state to move our business forward. So I compliment the entire team on this endeavor. That includes Ivalua, but it also includes all the other vendors who stepped up and said, we want to make things easier. We want to do our part, our duty for the state to help. What do you need? And that has made the operation of government has bettered the operation of government, because we really do recognize the value of our partners that are there at the table with us.
Hey, Tom, is it okay if I jump in real quick with a question, something that Bob said? Thanks. So
By all
Bob,
means.
yeah, appreciate it. So Bob, you mentioned that, everybody was competing, especially during this pandemic, everybody's competing for the same supplies. Were there, and this is really a two-part question, first part for Bob and Secretary Churchill, and the second part for Secretaries Luna and Buckler. But Bob and Secretary Churchill, were there opportunities to collaborate with other states in those purchases, opportunities to partner? And then for Secretaries Luna and Buckler, were there opportunities within the state to partner among your departments?
I'll start and then I'll kick it to Bob. The simple answer is yes. There were opportunities. At the very beginning of the pandemic, things were going at such a feverish pace that we really weren't able to recognize that there are opportunities there, because everyone was in a mad dash to get a particular commodity and for their use. With time, we recognized, and all of us that are on the call are within the national organizations for things. So that was a benefit to be able to pick up the phone and talk to our neighboring states, or even talk to other states in the region or across the nation to see if there are opportunities to fulfill a specific need. And I will go ahead and kick it to Bob. He can talk to you about some of the things that we engaged in.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So, I heard somebody once told me that we're all paid to be parochial, in the sense that we have to look after what we are paid to be responsible for. And no one begrudges any other jurisdiction from having to do what it needed to do to meet its mission needs. But I think what this did was it brought to the fore how deep the gap was in the ability to fulfill what we needed for our jurisdictions. And I think socializing this with our partners in the other jurisdictions, we all recognize that we're in this boat together, but we did have to take care of our own citizens and our own taxpayers in our own jurisdiction. And being on the calls was very helpful. I mean, I have a colleague who, went to China and got in the front of the manufacturing line with a whole lot of cash. And didn't have to worry about, the financing, the accounting, the treasurer, all of the built-in standard infrastructure that governs what we do. They recognize sort of the expeditionary nature of what we were in, because they had operated in that nature, in that sort of environment in other places of the world. So they were the firstest with the mostest at the head of the line to get what they needed. we had to grow into that sort of culture to understand the dynamics of supply and demand, do that. And I think that the technology helped us, but also the Secretary's point, the national associations, we met weekly, bi-weekly, understanding what the pain points were with the other jurisdictions so that we could share practices and to benefit us. And so that sort of collegial nature was essential to our success, I believe.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And before I turn it back over to Tom, similar question to Secretaries Luna and Buckler in terms of working within the state of Maryland with your other departments.
So there's a lot of work with the other departments, and as Bob and Secretary Churchill mentioned, Lewis and I are both very tied in with NASFA, the National Association of State Facility Administrators. So we've stayed in touch with our colleagues in other states on what they're doing. From my division for design and construction, we've been very tied in with our partners, some construction companies that we've done a lot of this COVID build with, our design companies that we've been partnering with, and then our sister agencies that we work with that we're tied very closely to, the Department of Health, the staff there for design and construction. So there are a lot of partnerships. COVID forced us to step outside of our normal partnerships because we did a lot of work on private sector hospitals, which we hadn't done previously. Our typical work is state facilities. So my staff had to jump out and work with private hospitals all over the state, which changed the stakeholder makeup, but we were able to work through those communication challenges and get some new partners along the way.
From a facilities management standpoint, we also saw great partnerships across agencies where individuals and entities collaborated and recognized the nature of the beast and understood that all sank or swam together. Human nature being what it is, sometimes when you stress test, you see where the cracks are, and sometimes there were some agencies that didn't want to collaborate because they were very parochial, using Bob's term. And over time, we've had to work with them and through their challenges and their needs and help them understand that we all benefit from having a collaborative approach. If my neighbor's house is burning and I have a hose and some water, I'm going to help them because otherwise my house is going to be next. And that learning process has taken place here. It's a new environment. People have reacted differently because they've never seen this kind of behavior or this kind of an activity going on. We haven't had a worldwide pandemic since 1918, 1919 with the Spanish flu. And so that institutional memory has disappeared, what to do. And we've had to relearn that. And it's taken a little bit of time, but I think we're there.
Sean, let me add one other thing to this. And government can be very siloed. And so the pandemic clearly identified, spotlighted that the silos had to be broken down and eliminated so that the state can succeed. So this department, to an extent that is really unparalleled, has worked with our sister agencies, public safety, health, human services, planning, state police, aviation department, Maryland Department of Transportation, to marshal all the resources that each of the departments can muster to be able to succeed. And I think that paradigm will outlive this pandemic, that being forced to work together identifies why it's easier to get something done in a collaborative way than trying to go it alone. General Services is always known as the utility player. We're the folks that come off the bench and solve problems. But when you can collaborate with other departments, it's 100 times a better result.
If I could add something very quickly to that, one of the things that I think emerged in my mind in this was the technology piece, in terms of being an equalizer for the entire enterprise infrastructure back to the silos. You know, I can remember the day when every agency had their own ERP, their own, you know, sourcing tools, their own whatever processes. This sort of equalized everybody's pain, but it also reinforced the need to have sort of a common operating platform to access suppliers, to be able to issue orders, render payments. We're not there yet in Maryland, but that's the journey that we're on, is to try to get to that where we can leverage sort of the collective needs across the enterprise in order to represent ourselves to the supply network in order to get that throughput back to efficiency. If we can get effectively built that sort of structure, then we can become much more efficient about how we obtain our goods and services through that. And then we're not siloed. To the Secretary's point about working with the other agencies, this really highlighted, I think, our need to be able to build that sort of common infrastructure to be able to do that. Of course, building in the necessary safeguards, risk management, because, you know, once you put all your eggs in one basket, then there's risk for that too. But I think that can be mitigated and, you know, through a lot of, you know, tools and so forth that we have. I'll stop there.
Bob, just to build on that, one of the technology platforms that we had before the pandemic, but that we are now accelerating to adopt throughout the state, is a computerized maintenance management system for our facilities. Now, we had simply done it within our own agency as a tool to give us more data and allow us to be more proactive rather than reactive in terms of dealing with facilities issues. But as agencies have seen the value of what we've done, then we've invited them to come on board, and they are doing so, to come up with a shared platform on that. The beauty of, if you can see that, or say that word, of the pandemic, is that it allows us to accelerate that process, so that, as the Secretary Churchill just said, cutting through the stovepipes, it cuts through the bureaucratic, no, we can't do it that way, or it takes too long, pushback and mentality, and allows us to say, no, this really helps everybody, and it gives us tools that allow us to be much faster and much more effective. And it really creates an environment that allows us to get to the desired end state much faster.
Not to ramble on, and thank you, Louis, but the other factor that comes to mind, and I want to mention, is transparency. So being in a public environment, there's a lot of people who are sort of on the sidelines wanting to know, well, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Who are we doing it with? What, you know, it's the spend cube. What are we buying? Who are we buying it from? How much are we buying? How much are we paying for it? So I think, to Lewis's point, that being able to present that in sort of a technology platform going forward will allow us to be able to have the reporting and analytics that can then satisfy the needs to report out that to people who need to know, frankly, our citizens. But we also have our legislators, our auditors, the finance, accounting, and all the others that need to know that. And then it becomes a business solution. So it's public business being done, to Lewis's point, effectively, efficiently, but then we don't have to go back and manually compile a whole bunch of data and reports that takes a lot of resources away from dealing with the pandemic.
Secretary Buckler, you spoke earlier about your office's role in planning facilities projects. Have you seen a greater willingness to shed office space given what we've experienced over the past several months, and you know, ability for folks to work from home during this pandemic?
I think we're seeing a mixed response at this point. We're seeing an interest in investigating these options. We are seeing an interest amongst, you know, internally with my own staff that have come from the private sector to work for the state, that have seen business done a different way, or younger staff that are more willing to embrace technology. And we've seen that across the board with the agencies that we work with and serve. There's a lot of small changes that need to be made to make this overall big change. And we went in overnight, and we're making it work right now. And we're trying to push some of that long-term change. And it's more of a change management at this point than a physical space management, is what I think that we're finding in a lot of these cases, but we are working through them case by case, and we are optimistic that long-term we're going to shrink our footprint, which is going to help us across the board. It's going to help us in managing our facilities and in maximizing the state's funds towards our capital improvements. So we are looking at this positively, optimistically, and hopefully long-term we will see some significant changes.
Thank you. I know we're coming up here against, I think, 3 or 4 minutes before we wrap up. And again, we sincerely appreciate your time. I think one of the takeaways I wanted to end with was, for all of you, what were some of the most unexpected surprises or unexpected changes that you had to deal with over and above the everyday? Is there anything that stands out among everything that's happened in the past year or so?
I'll be brief. One, the fact that this department and other state agencies are nimble. When oppressed, can be nimble to respond to an appropriate challenge. Two, people. People are key, and we recognize that. And in a long-term engagement, we need to, of course, also identify how we not burn out folks, because we are now experiencing the result of that from a long-term engagement. And lastly, that training, training solves all things in many ways, and we've identified definite opportunities for greater training to move us into the next period of government operation after the pandemic. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. This has been tremendously valuable, and I'm sure valuable to everybody that organizationally will have a chance to listen to this. So I want to thank everybody from the state of Maryland for providing this great feedback. I also want to send a big thank you to NASCA for putting this series together and providing the opportunity that we can learn from each other. So thank you again, everyone.